God, I don't even know how to pronounce the guy's name. Hello, everyone. This is us again, members of Let's Read Philosophy and Literature and Psychotherapy. We're reading Peter. Come on, help me out. What's his name? Peter somebody?
Is he German?
He's Norwegian.
Oh, I no, I know nothing about. We can just call him
Don't
Peter.
don't you just say Zapf, or is it Zapfa or Zapfa?
Peter Zapf. Yeah.
That word.
Wessel Zapf. Is it? Or Zapf Wessel? Wessel Zapf. Okay. Well, there you go. We've already butchered it. And the short essay is called The Last Messiah. Stumbled upon it on one of those when I searching through the depths of the internet for interesting things to read. Apparently, it's quite famous. I've never heard of it before. Had any of you guys heard of this one before? No. What would we call it? Existentialism, I'm guessing. Yeah, we're happy with that.
On the Wikipedia, he calls himself a nihilist.
Oh God, really? Well, and there was a smattering of anti-natalism right at the end, which sounds like
Mm.
nihilism. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
existentialism might be too generous.
yeah, okay. All right. I this would
Not
be
that I don't like it. I've got I sort of I understand. Like I don't have anything against any of those
oh,
things. Like,
cool. Well, I think it's going to be really interesting because I think some of us will and some of us won't, and some of us will be in the middle. I really think that might be how it pans out. So why don't I share the text? Okie dokies. Share. So just quickly, there's five parts, isn't there? Are you guys, you can see that all right? You don't need me to expand it. Okay. It's the first bit's so short, we could just read the first little bit and have a bit of commentary around it. Who would like to read that? Who's got a nice reading voice?
You read it,
okay.
Courtney. We can all take turns.
Okay. I don't think I got a very nice reading voice, but thank you for volunteering me. One night in long bygone times, man awoke and saw himself. He saw that he was naked under the cosmos, homeless in his own body. All things dissolved before his testing thought. Wonder above wonder, horror above horror, unfolded in his mind. Then woman too awoke and said it was time to go and slay. And he fetched his bow and arrow, a fruit of the marriage of spirit and hand, and went outside beneath the stars. But as the beasts arrived at their water holes where he expected them of habit, he felt no more the tigers bound in his blood, but a great psalm about the brotherhood of suffering between everything alive. That day he did not return with prey, and when they found him by the next new moon, he was sitting dead by the water hole. Cheerful. So I
Mm.
like it. It's a good hook, isn't it? I mean, what does it tell us about what we're about to read, do you think?
Well, it kind of reminded me a bit of Nietzsche and thus spake Zarathustra because he's kind of um, doing this biblical vibe. It's like the Garden of Eden, um, but yeah, it's it's not as cheerful as that.
It,
But yeah, it's kind of this quasi archaic kind of style. And there's a man and there's a woman, so that's kind of reminiscent of Adam and Eve as well. Um, and also the great psalm about the brotherhood of suffering. And so, yeah, it's like that's
May,
how he sets the scene.
may I add to this Adam and Eve theme? They say that very similarly, the the sword that the cherub that sits before the gate of Eden, the sword that turns on every which way and in, is much like this self-rationalizing consciousness, this this ability to understand both yourself being. I think it takes that Christian strand and really runs with it. It's quite good.
that's an interesting point. It's a flaming sword, isn't it? If I recall.
Yes, yes. It bends in, but I think there's a continuous theme throughout.
Yeah, so there's a kind of biblical style here already, which is going to kind of tell us that it has something to do with morality as well. perhaps.
And he has set us up straight away with a dilemma. He's in a quandary. He has a problem, you know. He's
And what is that dilemma, do you think?
he's a human.
Yeah. Yeah, it must be very unfortunate to be this kind of creature that needs to eat other creatures to live, but has developed a conscience about it, right? And suddenly afflicted by these feelings that seem to come out of nowhere, out of too much rational capacity, this capacity for compassion, for example. I think it's going to be. Yeah. Shall we move on? So we're at part 2 already. Wow, we're really speeding through this text. That's wonderful. So we could either quickly read it, or we could just pick out parts that we thought were interesting. What do you reckon?
It's not that long. We could try belting it through between us all and just read.
Okay. Would you
Read a
like
few
to start
paragraphs.
reading this?
All right, I'll do a couple of paragraphs. Whatever happened? A breach in the very unity of life, a biological paradox, an abomination, an absurdity, an exaggeration of disastrous nature. Life had overshot its target, blowing itself apart. A species had been armed too heavily by a spirit made almighty without, but equally a menace to its own well-being. Its weapon was like a sword without hilt or plate, a two-edged blade cleaving everything. But he who is to wield it must grasp the blade and turn the one edge towards himself.
So
So that's the things Sam was talking about.
yeah, so what is this sword? Is it the intellect? Is it reason? That's what it seems to be, right?
It's to notice, it's to see. It's to see into a thing and not just see the thing itself.
Which is
To see the
it's reflective reason, isn't it?
Yes, because eventually, once you do that to everything, this is the dilemma we're in with science now. Once we've done that completely to the material, the only place left to do that is to only the self is left.
Mm. Well, yeah, we want to question everything about the world and understand it, but in doing so, it turns in on ourselves as well, and it creates this interiority, right? And we become a victim of our own quest for knowledge in a certain sense. Do you think that's kind of what we're talking about? Are we all sort of with that? Carrying
I'll
on?
do one more. Yeah. Despite his new eyes, man was still rooted in matter, his soul spun into it and subordinated to its blind laws. And yet he could see matter as a stranger, compare himself to all phenomena, see through and locate his vital processes. He comes to nature as an unbidden guest, in vain extending his arms to beg conciliation with his maker. Nature answers no more. It performed a miracle with man, but later did not know him. He has lost his right of residence in the universe, has eaten from the tree of knowledge and been expelled from paradise. He is mighty in the near world, but curses his might as purchased with his harmony of soul, his innocence, his inner peace in life's embrace.
Yeah. Well, it's quite powerful, isn't it? It's very Nietzschean, like you were saying, Judith. Yeah. So
Yeah, so this idea that that human intellect is somehow excessive and detrimental to our own well-being, I guess. And so inevitably then there's an implication, well, is there some form of, like noble savage who hasn't reached the pinnacle of, reflective reason that the civilized person has reached? And there's this, and then he later on dismisses that as well. But in a sense, he seems to be coming to this with the notion that human intellect is somehow excessive and too great for its own for human well-being. But it's not really clear to me how he's arrived at that conclusion. He seems to put it front and center, but he hasn't really argued for it.
So despite his new eyes, so he sees with the eyes of reason, but he's still rooted in matter. So he's grounded in a body and its senses and its desires and so on and so forth. But he's self-conscious in ways that are going to torment him, right? So he's going to become aware of his death and the meaninglessness of life ultimately. And that's what makes him no longer part of nature, right? So he's excommunicated from that kind of potential the peacefulness of ignorance or whatever. Ignorance is bliss, that kind of idea, right? Um, yeah, it sounds pretty grim, doesn't it? And I think here you see Nietzsche, really, you do, because Nietzsche talked about like what happens to the uh I might be getting this wrong. You guys can correct me if you remember. It's been so long since I read his stuff on ressentiment, where he talks about the oppressed people, I think, and how they turn inwards on themselves, and in doing so, this ressentiment builds on the inside, which is an internal hollowing out of the self, where an interiority develops, but it's a kind of perverse nature, no longer connected to nature, and it's kind of got this moral, rational element to it. But in a way, yeah, it's a kind of it's always a distancing from from man as an animal, man as nature, that kind of thing. Does that ring any bells? I'm pretty rusty. So next paragraph,
Well,
I can go.
I'll do one more, and and I'll pass it on. So there he stands with his visions, betrayed by the universe in wonder and fear. The beast knew fear as well, in thunderstorms and on the lion's claw. But man became fearful of life itself, indeed of his very being. Life, that was for the beast to feel the play of power. It was heat and games and strife and hunger, and then at last to bow before the law of course. In the beast, suffering is self-confined. In man, it knocks holes into a fear of the world and a despair of life. Even as the child sets out on the river of life, the roars from the waterfall of death rise highly above the veil, ever closer and tearing at its joy. Man beholds the earth, and it is breathing like a great lung. Whenever it exhales, delightful life swarms from all its pores and reaches out towards the sun. But when it inhales, a moan of rupture passes through the multitude, and corpses whip the ground like bouts of hail. Not merely his own day could he see, the graveyards wrung themselves before his gaze, the laments of sunken millennia wailed against him from the ghastly decaying shapes, the earth-turned dreams of mothers. Future's curtain unravelled itself to reveal a nightmare of endless repetition, a senseless squander of organic material. The suffering of human billions makes its entrance into him through the gateway of compassion. From all that happened arises a laughter to mock the demand for justice, his profoundest ordering principle.
do you want to
He
stop
sees
there?
himself in, yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
that's a lot. And I think Judith will agree. Obviously, this is like an inversion of the cosmic perspective to see it as something other than providential and benevolent, and how the Greeks might have seen it. Instead, it's something much more terrible, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's focusing on and to be fair, I think what Zapfe is reflecting here is one strand in the kind of the Darwinian tradition, which I think he explicitly refers to a bit later. But one of those strands is that nature in its profusion is as neglectful and as blind, I guess, and kind of careless. That was kind of a cliche in the kind of the tradition, and I guess that's a kind of a post-Christian tradition as well. So I think he's reflecting that, whereas again, for the ancient philosophers, nature was bountiful, and her profusion was a good thing. Here, her profusion is seen as careless and un yeah, just yeah, in a negative manner, I guess, and a senseless squander of organic material. Whereas for the ancients, yeah, there was no squander because everything had its role. So as you say, Courtney, it's a total inversion, and yeah, it's a very negative, very negative view of nature, I would say.
And it's pointless. And I think the trouble for the man is he can see it, you know. This is the problem with having this kind of intellect. He can perceive its nature to be like that, that it's a pointless um experience of going
Uh,
nowhere, just pointless suffering. And unfortunately, he can see it, so it means he has to not only suffer himself, but also suffer through compassion because he can see the suffering of everything else as well. And he has to take the lives of other living things if he wants to even live. So that makes it even worse. And and also we see that there's no way out because this is the eternal recurrence of the same that Nietzsche kind of comes up with too, this endless repetition. So later on, he'll actually say, you know, man's trapped in this cosmos. He even imagines an eternity or whatever where, you know, even he can't escape not only death, but potentially everlasting life, everlasting torment. It sounds pretty damn grim. You were going to say something, Sam or
which in
Toby?
some ways is a Gnostic reflection of spirit trapped in a material prison, trapped in a prison of matter. But this is also like, as as a differential to like an ancient or Stoic view, this is nature specific without nature as a macrocosm. This is man being above the chattel, above the animals, just doing what is obvious to them as they do, without an awareness or alignment or even a possibility of there being something like nat nature, capital N. There's nothing else to join. There's only something to extrapolate out of and then escape the bounds of and spill over.
Also, the reference there to justice as his greatest, where are we? His demand for justice, his profoundest ordering principle. So even though he might have innate sense of virtue or an innate sense of justice, he can't recognize it in the suffering of the billions. He can't see that there is any justice at all, you know.
It's a kind of cosmic joke,
Mm.
this idea. And did you notice? Oh, sorry, you haven't read the next bit, but yeah, I'll read it. He says he sees himself emerge in his mother's womb. He holds up his hand in air and it has five branches, presumably his fingers, right? But I assume that also means the five senses of the body. Whence this devilish number five, and what has it to do with my soul? Did you notice this has five mini chapters too? So there's obviously some interest here in five. I guess it's a notion of being embodied with the senses and having a body. Oh, I just put my hand up and did that. That's interesting. um, so he is no longer obvious to himself. So having a body, somehow he is no longer obvious to himself. He touches his body in utter horror. This is you, and so far do you extend and no further. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we kind of have this sense that we're, I don't know, as an ego, we feel kind of omnipotent, but then we look and we check and we have a body, and this is it, you know. Um, he carries a meal within him. Yesterday it was a beast that could itself dash around. Now I suck it up and make it part of me. And where do I begin and end? All things chain together in causes and effects, and everything he wants to grasp dissolves before the testing thought. Soon he sees mechanics, even in the so far whole and dear, in the smile of his beloved. There are other smiles as well, a torn boot with toes, Eventually, the features of things are features only of himself. Nothing exists without himself. Every line points back at him. The world is but a ghostly echo of his voice. He leaps up loudly, screaming, and wants to disgorge himself onto the earth along with his impure meal. He feels the looming of madness and wants to find death before losing even such ability. Wow. So what does all that mean?
Well, I think what he says at the end there is accurate. He feels the looming of madness. He knows that these reflections are somehow not sane, not very healthy. So yeah, he's perceiving that something's not right with the way he's seeing everything, and with himself as the center of everything. So yeah, his vision is distorted. Soon he sees mechanics even in the so far whole and dear in the smile of his beloved. So and the smile in the torn boot, he's seeing things that are not really there. I think he's telling us that nothing exists without himself. So his own obsession is kind of suffusing everything. So yeah, I think he's acknowledging that this is not this is not very this is not healthy. I think at this point he can recognize that. But yeah, then he moves on.
Well, he sees his own suffering in everything too, doesn't he? And I guess, I mean, it's really cryptic. I think I'm not very good at understanding poetry, maybe, but is he's anthropomorphizing everything, right? The whole world. He sees it all as like the torn boot with toes is a human smile, that kind of thing. He sees himself in everything, but more
He's
than
not. Mm.
yeah, I was just going to say, he becomes so isolated, so alienated from his connection to anything in the world that it's him all alone. Just him, his voice, his smile echoed in everything. So he's he's even if he's surrounded by other people, everybody's in this story is absolutely living in their own subjective world, in their own subjective madness, unable to reach out and actually know one another.
Because it's not just the reason behind the smile, like the pull strings of the musculature or or the chemical motivations, but then it's but then those things only matter to you because of the human perception of it. So even the rationalization behind, the face of your beloved becomes not just the domino behind it, but it only exists because you've noticed. So then the only thing in the world is really you, and the rest is a reflection of you, which I, which is why I think he wishes he would die before he went completely mad. Because completely mad, he'd just be a part of the shrapnel. He'd be of the shrapnel itself, of the flow of death. Knowing he will go mad and wishing he would finish before that, as at least to say, I wish I would die with some limitations.
Mm. And I guess if you have such an overdeveloped capacity, like that's what they're talking about, this intellect, it's almost like a neurosis, isn't it? It's not like a natural thing. So it's bound to drive him mad. It's an unhealthy condition to have, to be this kind of creature that they're describing. I can't see everyone in the group, by the way. So if I'm ignoring everyone, just butt in. I can only see a certain number with the way my screen's set out. Who would like to read the next paragraph anyway?
Oh, I can do it. But as he stands before imminent death, he grasps its nature also and the cosmic import of the step to come. His creative imagination constructs new, fearful prospects behind the curtain of death, and he sees that even there is no sanctuary found. And now he can discern the outline of his biologico-cosmic terms. He is the universe's helpless captive, kept to fall into nameless possibilities. From this moment on, he is in a state of relentless panic. Such a feeling of cosmic panic is pivotal to every human mind. Indeed, the race appears destined to perish insofar as any effective preservation and continuation of life is ruled out when all of the individual's attention and energy goes to endure or relay the catastrophic high tension within. The tragedy of a species becoming unfit for life by over-evolving one ability is not confined to humankind. Thus, it is thought, for instance, that certain deer in paleontological times succumbed as they acquired overly heavy horns. The mutations must be considered blind. They are thrown forth without any contact of interest with their environment. In depressive states, the mind may be seen in the image of such an antler in all its fantastic splendor, pinning its bearer to the ground.
It's a striking image, isn't it? And I mean, it's quite a compelling piece of rhetoric, really. What do you guys think of that? I mean, I've heard it described like this too. I can't remember which particular famous therapist, but they said something like, of all the creatures, man has this capacity to magnify his sadness to the point where it becomes reasonable to kill himself, which is quite an interesting phenomena that obviously Zapfe is kind of paying attention to here as well.
The analogy to the deer having these overly heavy horns, like us having an overdeveloped rational force. You'd have to think, what was the purpose of the overdeveloped horns? Well, in a lot of animals, it's usually done as in a mating thing, which makes them more attractive to the female. But that might not be the case. It's just unusual to have a trait like this carried forward in natural selection. There's usually a reason. He's saying it was a mistake, right? He's saying it's an error, it's a fault, it's an error, it's a bad move of evolution. But I just wonder about that. I wonder what biologists would say about the development of the horns and what purpose they might have give in the realm of deer land,
I guess you could say something like, life can actually have these outgrowths that aren't particularly, I want to say adaptive, but that's not quite right because having a piercing, powerful intellect is very adaptive. It gave us the edge over, whatever, the dangers of the world around us. But on the other hand, it seems like there's another element to it that he's really playing with, which is it is adaptive, it's powerful, but on the other hand, it's self-destructive to the individual because we turn it inward on ourselves, and we can use it to torment ourselves. I think he makes a really good point because what he's saying is that's really a weird phenomenon of nature that you've got this capacity that misused. I mean, we could take this in a more positive light and say misused, it's a really destructive tool. And I think I'd agree with that. It's where he goes with it that seems a bit unsettling, but I think I could agree with that, that basic premise. What do you guys think?
I can pull a Darwinian thread on adaptiveness. In evolutionary terms, there's adaptive hyper-specialization, and then there's adaptive generalization. It seems like a lot of the dinosaurs being so large, being so specifically pointed towards kind of a carnivore diet, is something like it's very, very good for exactly the conditions it already had. But the kind of proto-mammals and basic animals, the less hyper-specialized, um, are, are more capable of being flexible, more capable of living in the environment, especially if the environment changes. So the fact that these are Paleolithic deer, that they're specialized for that particular environment but not able to change as the conditions change, is sort of an indication of if you get so good at one thing, you're quite you're you're very well adapted but also handicapped. And I think he's saying something like we've evolved in intellect so much to understand our position in the universe, that we're now kind of outside of natural, almost embodied bounds. Like we're the most example.
And the other
Yeah,
point there, sorry, go on, Judy.
Oh, sorry, Joe. Yeah, I just wanted to say, yeah, I think that's a good point, Sam. But so there's this um, notoriously, there's the peacock's tail was something that actually disturbed Charles Darwin himself. You know, it said he kept him up at night. Why would a bird have this huge, overdeveloped, beautiful structure, which obviously impedes its ability to fly? And in recent times, as I understand it, one theory about that has been that, well, it advertises that the holder of that feature is otherwise a good mate because they are able to carry off a feature which otherwise would normally lead to their destruction. So if a male peacock with his wonderful tail has survived to this point, then presumably he has the traits and the genes which would make him a good partner. So these kind of excessive traits are explained in terms of the fact that the individual which can carry them off would be a good potential mate. So I think that's one feature of what that's if you buy the whole Darwinian package. That's one explanation. But how that would translate to a human scenario and I think is questionable. But the other point I wanted to raise with what he's just mentioned here, sorry, Courtney, do you just mind going back up a tick? I just want to get the wording right. Yeah, he says the feeling of cosmic panic is pivotal to every human mind. It's like, well, hang on, he's generalized this to every human. That seems a very bold move.
But I think he's talking about
yeah.
Fear of death, though, isn't he, Judy? Because even where you started reading, he was basically saying, you know, how we all have such an incredible fear of death and that feeling of cosmic panic. I thought he was bringing that back to our rather global fear of death, you know, as humans.
Well, maybe, but surely even then it's kind
Imminent
of
death.
overstating it, right? I mean, not every person has a feeling of cosmic panic, and yet he's asserting that is the universal human condition, which, by the way, is also something Nietzsche does. He kind of universalizes his particular preoccupations to the rest of humanity. I just wonder quite why he's universalizing it in this way.
I think we see psychoanalysis in the background here too, and that's got that idea of unconscious fears that drive us. You know, I think that crops up a few times through here. So yeah, and I think that's the problem. It was written in the 1930s, wasn't it? So it's obviously a bit dated now, but these psychoanalytic perspectives, there's a process kind of perspective going on here too, like you say, the Darwinian stuff. Um, and it's criticizing religion. I think you're right, Jody, in a sense he's talking about death and how people invent religions. He says here his creative imagination constructs new fearful prospects behind the curtain of death. So we can never escape. You know, in a way I can relate to what he's saying. It would be nice to know that if you're sick of all this, you could just die and disappear. But we're trapped even in that. Like there's this sense in which even it doesn't even end after death because of our creative imagination. We imagine, like Nietzsche says, backworlds, you know, we imagine these afterworlds. And they could be horrible if we haven't done the right thing, for example. And I think you mentioned the Gnostic thing too, Sam, and I agree. And I think this is the Schopenhauerian influence, where Schopenhauer, if you recall, is influenced by Eastern religion, and he thinks it would be better for things not to have existed at all, and all of this disturbance is unnecessary, and nirvana is the ultimate goal, right? It would be better to have nothing at all. But there's no way out. We're all trapped in existence.
If there is nothing, though, there is a way out, isn't there? I suppose that's how I would interpret the Eastern thing. Like nothing is the way out.
Yeah, and Schopenhauer says we must have done something wrong, and so we're in a penitentiary. But here it's worse. The penitentiary seems to last forever. There's no escape. And that must be maddening, I guess, if it's true at some unconscious level, right? What about part three? Who'd like to read this one? This is really, I feel really uplifted reading this. What about you guys? Read away.
I'll go.
Who's reading?
Why then has mankind not long ago gone extinct during great epidemics of madness? Why do only a fairly minor number of individuals perish because they fail to endure the strain of living, because cognition gives them more than they can carry? Cultural history, this is a panic chimed with the chorus of children. Cultural history, as well as observations of ourselves and others, allow the following answer. Most people learn to save themselves by artificially limiting the content of consciousness.
All right, that's really
If-
interesting, right? Because that's what you're talking about, Sam. Like if we're this kind of creature, like you said, the Brontosaurus or whatever, that was useful to a certain point, well, human beings have to somehow find ways to curtail or limit the power of their intellect for their own benefit, right? To some degree. That's what it sounds like. Sorry, I didn't mean to prevent you
No,
reading.
no,
And
It's
he's even sort of I like this bit about cultural history as well as observation of ourselves and others allows the following answer, um, because cultural history. So in a way, he's suggesting that all of our culture develops to limit our consciousness.
yeah, yeah.
Possibly you could read it.
I, I don't fundamentally disagree, or I think it at least makes sense. How is that different to saying, well, like I offload some like the weight and burden of my own consciousness to make my identity nationalism, or to make it a part of a religious sect and a set of predefined dogmas, or even a common culture, and uh, and I
totally.
allowed that to go ahead rather than an absolute burden on myself to define everything.
And if it's a kind of nihilism, there's like literally no real meaning behind anything. So it means going to work, um, being interested in anything, basically, philosophy, history, psychology. It's all just stuff we do to keep ourselves busy so that we're
Marking time.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
We're
uh,
focusing our mental energy on something other than the real thing, which is, oh my God, I'm so smart and I've worked out that this is all bullshit and I'm just treading water until, I don't know, I go crazy.
I was thinking about this today. I'm like, do I come back? Do I keep coming back, but I'm bored? But then I'm bored of being bored. So, so what else is there to do but to sublimate or to distract?
Well, yeah.
I'll go
And
ahead.
do you know, one day my family were in China and I hadn't been without them for a few years. And I was in this house all by myself and it hit me. I was like, holy shit, what do I do? Like there was like a half a day, maybe a day, where it was kind of a weird cosmic panic. Like I had no idea what to do. I sat there on the couch. I think I went to bed at 4:30 in the afternoon. It was like a real shock because normally I'm like cooking dinner or making something or doing something or busy or, like I don't have to think. I literally have something to keep me occupied all the time having a family. But you take that away and
It,
it's a
it,
shock.
Courtney, it's almost like you lived in a almost like a hospital hallway, of guide rails and something to lean on and some manner to direct you as you went forward. And all of a sudden, none of that was there. You're in a field.
Yeah, yeah, it's terrifying. The house seemed darker and ominous even. Yeah, it really did.
I might just add, I don't have kids and I spend a lot of time alone, and I actually find that like the ultimate peace. Like I revel in that feeling. I think you can become very comfortable with it and actually more comfortable with that than being in the world. Like if you get comfortable in that, it's scary because suddenly, yeah, what else is there, if you've got all your needs
I,
taken.
I totally agree, Catherine. I totally agree with where you're at.
I'd agree with you guys, but it's that moment when you're not used to it, when it hits you, the strangeness of it. And then what happens with me is after say a day, I'm overcome by a kind of mania where there's so much freedom, I can do anything I want, and it's a bit overstimulating. I feel that other side of it, that kind of madness. I feel, oh my God, I could do anything I want. I could go to the pub, I could burn the house down. You know, I could run off with another woman. There's all sorts of things. All these possibilities crowd in on me. Maybe I overthink things though.
But maybe they just stay thoughts too, and that awareness of thought is, yeah, part of that too.
And
To be aware of your thinking and then actually how you want to act and how you want to be and how you want to walk and how you want to eat your meal when it's just you, no witnesses, just you.
yeah. Well, in the first day or two, I felt alarmed about these thoughts, so I went to bed at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
I might continue.
Continue.
If the giant deer at suitable intervals had broken off the outer spears of its antlers, it may have kept going for some while longer, yet in fever and constant pain indeed, in betrayal of its central idea, the core of its peculiarity, for it was vocated by creation's hand to be the horn bearer of wild animals. What it gained in continuance, it would lose in significance, in grandness of life. In other words, a continuance without hope, a march not up to affirmation, but forth across its ever recreated ruins, a self-destructive race, the sacred will of blood. The identity of purpose sorry, and perishment is, for giant deer and man alike, the tragic paradox of life. In devoted Bajong, the, the last Cervus gigantus bore the badge of its lineage right to its end. The human being saves itself and carries on. It performs to extend a settled phase, a more or less self-conscious repression of its damaging surplus of consciousness. The process is virtually constant during our waking active hours and is a requirement of social adaptability and of everything commonly referred to as healthy and normal living.
Yeah, so he's going to outline at least four different strategies that human beings use apparently to dim their intellect. And the first one is some sort of more or less self-conscious repression. Okay. Um, and you can see the mark of, I think, psychoanalysis here because his idea of psychiatry is kind of expressed that way. Psychiatry even works on the assumption that the healthy and viable is at one with the highest in personal terms. Not entirely sure what's meant there. Does anyone, what do you think that he means there?
I suppose he's saying that in this era, as he was in the 30s, healthy and viable is now essentially what was equivalent to what was the highest in previous times, which of course was framed by Christianity, I guess. So he's saying that the healthy has become the obsession of the age, whereas, and I think to a certain degree he's probably right. There was in the sort of first half of the 20th century, there was a health mania essentially. So I think he's right that the healthy is now the criterion of the good life.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, thanks for that.
I sort of saw it more going, maybe referring possibly to the social. Um, it says this process is virtually constant during our waking active hours and is a requirement of social adaptability and of everything commonly referred to as healthy and normal living. So that whole idea of us performing a role socially is, to be seen as healthy and normal, you have to be seen in society and functioning in society in a social, adaptable way, maybe.
Yeah, so
Where,
the healthy ego, sure. So
where before he highlighted the highest in personal terms of a self-seeking of justice, where he's sort of saying, but this substitution of healthy or, you know, kind of a middle kind of adaptability of not being hysterical on the streets or something like that, You know,
Mm.
Y- being well adjusted gets substituted for whatever is the highest.
That's a good point.
But
Because obviously, if it's a nihilism, then there's no such thing as maybe this kind of healthy ego. So depression or fear of life, refusal of nourishment, and so on are invariably taken as signs of a pathological state and treated thereafter. Often, however, such phenomena are messages from a deeper, more immediate others. I don't know what he means by that, others, but anyway. It has a crisis of confusion and anxiety and promptly looks around for another anchoring. And then he gives us this very strange quote. In autumn, I will attend middle school. So I guess this is the way the mind works. It comes up with kind of future goals and stuff to anchor us, give us some way of centering ourselves, so we don't fall into some sort of inner abyss of complete anxiety and terror. I don't know. So if the substitutions somehow fails, then the crisis may take a fatal course, or else what I will call an anchoring spasm occurs. So this sounds like some sort of reflex to link ourselves to something that feels permanent. I see this around about if there's no real structure in the world, because again, I see this as a kind of process view. He's saying we have to create these stable structures and these expectations that the things around us are real, and then we link them ourselves and our goals and our aspirations to them, so that we create something meaningful to do with ourselves, so that we don't fall into this terrible nihilism. One clings to the dead values as a result, apparently, concealing as well as possible from oneself and others the fact that they are unworkable, that one is spiritually insolvent. The result is lasting insecurity, feelings of inferiority, overcompensation, restlessness. Insofar as this state falls into certain categories, it is made subject to psychoanalytic treatment, which aims to complete the transition to new anchorings, which shows you what a pointless task psychoanalysis must be, because it's just moving from a decaying anchoring that's no longer useful, and hence the depressive kind of neuroses that must arise, this desperate hanging on to things that one can barely anchor themselves to, and then the doctor trying to help the person let go of the old and find new anchorings that they can kind of more, their ego with or onto in some sort of kind of desperation. Anchoring. Do you guys want to say anything about that before I move on?
Yeah, I thought it was actually really well observed. These uh, things or these strategies he outlines for that people actually, as a matter of fact, adopt in order to manage their lives, I guess. And I think, yeah, anchoring is this first one, which I think yeah, it's pretty well observed. I mean, we see people who yeah, maybe put all their focus maybe on a career or status or something like that, and it's fairly obviously a way in which they're, I suppose, compensating for maybe a lack of uh, an integrated life in other respects. So I think this is really well observed.
Yeah, I think it's really insightful too. And in fact, in modern cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, these dead values he's talking about that causes neurosis would be something like negative core beliefs, which, in modern language produce these kinds of things that he says: insecurity, feelings of inferiority, overcompensation, restlessness. The language is pretty similar today, to be fair. So, yeah, quite similar, really. So basically, we're telling ourselves things about the world, we would say in modern psychotherapy. We tell ourselves things about the world that are deeply unsettling, that I'm not valued, that the world's a terrible place, that I'll always be alone, that no one loves me, things like that, that are unconscious too, or subconscious at the very least. So it hasn't changed much. And the therapist tries to get people to challenge those dead views and anchor to something new. I think it's, like you say, Judith, very, very insightful and probably very accurate. Anchoring might be characterized, and this is the process view, right, as a fixation of points within or construction of walls around the liquid fray of consciousness. So when you say, he's really saying that consciousness is not structured necessarily, it's flowing. So we create these parameters for it that we can then hang our
We latch to
identity to.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we need to latch to these meaningful things, which are, in a sense, some kind of construction, right? Though typically unconscious, it may also be fully conscious. One adopts a goal. Publicly useful anchorings are met with sympathy. He who sacrifices him totally for his anchoring, like the firm, the cause, he's idolized. He has established a mighty bulwark against the dissolution of life, and others are by suggestion gaining from his strength. In a brutalized form, as deliberate action, it is found among decadent playboys. One should get married in time, and then the constraints will come of themselves. I mean, that sounds sort of silly, but I can relate to that. I was basically a total alcoholic until I started a family, and then I was challenged to change my behaviors because I had kids and a wife, and my behavior didn't work with that particular anchoring. I had to change. And I guess he's saying, like, without these structures, behavior can, well, this life instinct or whatever can totally get way out of hand, right? It can become what Nietzsche talked about, right? Dionysian, right? Self-destructive, a pure yes to life, or pure destructiveness. I don't know. Thus one establishes a necessity in one's life. Yeah, like I need to get married so I can sort myself out. Exposing oneself to an obvious evil from one's point of view, but a soothing of the nerves, a high-walled container for a sensibility to life that has been growingly, increasingly crude. Yeah, it fits exactly my situation. Like, there's a part of me that hates being married, but there's a part of me that enjoys the fact that it curtails my destructive urges. Well, I used to think like that at the very least. I mean,
I,
would
I'm
you read
going
it
through
that way?
exactly that. I'm going through exactly that choice and transformation or possibility of transformation now. How much of that are you willing to adopt on to, yeah, live, have that consciousness encapsulated into something that's limited and specific and focused?
Yeah, you have to curtail your freedom at some point, right? Otherwise the wheels can fall off. What do you guys think about that? Sam, I think that's really interesting. Anyone else? Or do you think it's all just mumbo jumbo at this point?
I think you can have your freedom and not have the wheels fall off. Like I don't think it's either or. It could be both and or maybe I don't know. But yeah,
Yeah, I
Men,
agree, Catherine. Yeah, I
bloody
yeah.
agree.
men, bloody men, right?
You can transcend the structures.
True.
I do sort
Yeah.
of think, yeah, you can. Well, that's my position anyway, and it's something I've been working towards personally.
I think
So
that's
you're
Because
a sub.
amazing. That's great. And I know Judith would be the voice of moderation too, and she'd just say, just got to be moderate. But yeah, I'd say, us decadent playboys in the room, like, what can we do, right?
I really what is it, resonate with that the Eagles take it easy, you know. Like do it before do something before you are ground up by your own wheels, grinding.
Lorraine, you look like you want to say something. No, she doesn't. All right. Ibsen in Hjalmar Ekdal and Molvik, two flowering cases, living lives. I haven't read it. Living lives, sorry. There is no difference between their anchoring and that of the pillars of society except for their practico-economic unproductiveness of the former. Sounds like you had to be there to know what he's talking about there. Any culture is a great rounded system of anchorings. Oh, here we're going to extol the virtues of culture and cultural ideas in keeping us sane, right? Built on foundational firmaments, the basic cultural ideas. And this is where they sit the services, they sit the needs for most average people. So the average person makes do with the collective firmaments. The personality is building for himself. The person of character has finished his construction, more or less grounded on the inherited collective main firmaments, God, the church, the state, morality, fate, the law of life, the people, the future. We might say science. The closer to main firmaments a certain carrying element is, the more perilous it is to touch. This is interesting, isn't it? Here, a direct protection is normally established by means of penal codes and threats of prosecution, inquisition, censorship, the conservative approach to life. There are just some structures that you just aren't allowed to fuck around with. You get in trouble.
They're harsh taboos, like it's the amount of like sexuality allowed in a culture or generation at the time. I really, I think this makes a lot of sense later when they talk about celebrating the kind of funerals of these things.
Yeah, I mean, lots of things like infidelity would be one. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff, isn't there? That homosexuality until recently. Um, yeah, there's always things. Does anyone want to say anything more about that? Madness, think about Foucault and the way he talks about the construction of madness, things like that.
Well, it changes
Yes.
over time, doesn't it? Like with marriage and like
Yeah,
yeah, there is a social construction for sure.
yeah.
And I was going to say, I wish I'm almost very hopeful or thankful. I think my friends who do some of this offloading, you know, find it quite relieving, find it quite relieving, that they can still rely on kind of an implicit Christianity or a lot of social structure.
Oh,
Like, and
yeah.
they don't have to think about, how they construe their lives or how they value
And that
everything.
was
Well, I
that.
guess
It,
they're anchoring,
it's
aren't they, Seb?
relaxing.
They're anchoring.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah. So I've
even
seen
if
this
they're
in my,
not explicitly, they're anchoring on something that they wouldn't explicitly support, but which implicitly is there.
And this is kind of an interesting potential critique, maybe, of Henry James's pragmatism, for example, because he'd say this anchoring is a healthy activity. If you choose the right things to follow, you'll have greater well-being and more optimism and be more resistant to depression. And it's not the pursuit of truth that matters, but rather the kind of consequences of the things that you value, that is what life is all about, kind of thing. Here, there's a kind of cynicism about that. Like, it seems, I don't know where he gets his cynicism from. I mean, what he's doing is really insightful and he's making some really great observations, but I don't think he really makes a strong case that the things that we do in order to manage our lives are necessarily bad. I mean, it sounds very life affirming, doesn't it? What's the problem here? I guess I'm asking.
I don't see a problem if it works for the person. Like either way, if it works for it's everyone's own journey, isn't it? And if the structure is like, I think there's a lot of beauty in all religions. I had the Quran given to me, and I got a Kabbalah book, and I've got a Catholic Bible because it has extra chapters in it. And I want to read them all, because there's beauty in all of them. And I'm actually part of none of them, but I can have great respect and be awed for all of them. So sort of everything and nothing. I'm
But
outside the structure there. There is no structure, but I can still appreciate the structure.
but you're healthy. You're anchoring yourself in a very healthy way to these wonderful distractions. So that's wonderful.
Yeah. Yep, indeed. And I'm all good with that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What's the problem? What do you think, Judith? Is there a problem with any of this?
Uh, well, if the fact the issue of whether there's a problem or not hinges on every individual, right? So somebody who is only anchoring in things that are or that their parents have put before them, or that they feel that they need to adhere to, right? That can lead to a lot of problems. Um, I think the problems arise where there is a mismatch between the social anchorings that are on offer and what the individual really wants or needs. So yeah, I mean, I think it yeah, it's incumbent on every individual and to um, themselves go through what they need to understand in order to adopt their own meaningful anchorings. But if they're not doing that, or if they're adopting anchorings that are just there for whatever reason, yeah, that's potentially problematic. And I think, as I said, I think Zapfe has identified something really profound here. That for many people, it's only when they have a midlife crisis that they realize that their anchorings have been mismatched or insufficient or somehow wrong or somehow not what they really believe are correct or supportive.
Yeah, I think so.
And that can have all kinds of follow-on impacts as well on their marriage or their kids or whatever. So, yeah, I think his insights are profound, but also, yeah, I think there are perhaps more constructive ways to view the things that people yeah, attach themselves to. Yeah.
I think he doesn't really get right. This is what I would say, the things that cause us distress. So he's saying, yeah, these false values or whatever that we, that give way, and when they give way, we're left with the wreckage of the illusion, sort of thing, perhaps. But what if there are actually appropriate anchors to have, and to follow a more stoic reading, like what if some anchors don't fall into conflict with one another and therefore maintain a kind of internal coherence as a system, and that means there can be harmony amongst the anchors, so to speak. Then wouldn't to do that be a way of inoculating yourself against the kind of terror that he's talking about? And I think that's precisely what the Stoics are kind of saying. They know that the world is a dangerous, scary place. If you don't have the right kind of structures, anchors, internal beliefs, or whatever. So you could quite easily go, yeah, this is great. I don't think he's right about the nature of all anchors. We have to live in the world. It's a huge leap to think that our capacities are a mistake, right from the outset. What if they actually give us the capacity to seek out the right anchors and to work out what is the right way to live a life, for example?
It,
I
it brings to mind the book which I haven't read, the one of the search for meaning, the gentleman that lived in the Holocaust that you've talked
Oh yeah,
about.
Viktor Frankl.
Yeah, see, Viktor Frankl springs to mind here, in his in the way he
mm.
portrays that whole search for meaning in life, and as many other people have illustrated as well, how they have found their meaning in life. So yeah, he's it's a hard one. He's very cynical. I find him very cynical.
But later on, I think he even offers a solution, pretty much basically what I just said. But he
What, in
grounds
the
it.
last paragraph where he tells everyone don't
No,
breathe?
no. In the second last one, he talks about that the solution is an organismic one, and I think that is a really, really solid result. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery how he gets to the cynical place. To be honest, for me, like this could quite easily be read as with a little tweak as a really you could make this fit a stoic kind of narrative. I think quite well. What do you think about that, Judith? Do you think I'm stretching it a bit farther?
Yeah, you're stretching it a long way for sure. No way. But I will say, is it the next section he talks about distraction, and I think that's really profound as well. I think he's 100% correct that there is, socially and individually, people do seek distraction. So the first thing he talked about was the anchoring. Now then he goes on to talk about distraction, and yeah, 100%. What is sport? The business of sport, what is that? And Hollywood and YouTube, what is that but distraction? 100%.
And it is insightful. He says the craving for material goods is not so much due to the direct pleasures of wealth, as none can be seated on more than one chair or eat himself more than sated. Rather, the value of a fortune to life consists in the rich opportunities for anchoring and distraction offered to the owner. That's really insightful. That's clever.
It means those things aren't things in themselves. We give them valence.
Yeah, and
It,
they give more opportunity for us to connect ourselves to things that prevent us from being exposed to meaninglessness, basically.
I like that they call distractions high status versions. Sport, look at this, fashion.
Yeah,
It's all simulated reality. It's
absolutely.
all like, let's not be embodied. Let's not take on these limitations, but let's look at the aesthetic of limitations,
Yeah. And
the gloss of it.
we can just jump from one fad to another and keep ourselves distracted. Yeah. Yeah, it's very insightful.
I have to protest against the final sentence on page 8, where he kind of almost formulaically has to say something about women. Women, in general, less cognition prone and hence more secure in their living than men, preferably use distraction. It's like, really? Did you have to go there? Did you have to do that? Yep, of course he did.
Sorry about that. I'll apologize on his behalf. He was anchored to the wrong things. Um, so where are we up to? We're skipping ahead a little bit. Uh, you mentioned page 8 just now. He says another flaw of the system is the fact that various danger fronts often require very different firmaments. Okay, so this is interesting. As a logical superstructure is built upon each, there follow clashes of incommensurable modes of feeling and thought. What do you think about this then, Judith? Like, think of someone like Marcus Aurelius who's striving for a coherent worldview, right? But there are incommensurable modes of feeling and thought in the fact that he believes in a Stoic system of harmony, that it doesn't matter which culture necessarily you're brought up in, we're all part of this kind of rational kinship. Yet, as the emperor of Rome, he has to go to war and fight against these barbarian tribes and kill people and take them into slavery, presumably. This is the kind of thing that I think he's talking about there. Then despair can enter through those sort of rifts. In such cases, a person may be obsessed with destructive joy, dislodging the whole artificial apparatus of his life and starting with rapturous horror to make a clean sweep of it. The horror stems from the loss of all sheltering values, the rapture from his by now ruthless identification and harmony with our nature's deepest secret, the biological unsoundness, the enduring disposition for doom. No.
Yeah,
Wait,
there's
yeah,
one paragraph. Oh, sorry, you go. Oh, there's one paragraph back on page 7. I'd just love us to look before we run too far ahead. Just back on page 7, in the middle there, there's a sentence that starts, but, there it is. But during such play, one may accidentally rip a hole right to the bottom, and the scene is instantly transformed from euphoric to macabre. The dread of being stares us in the eye, and a deadly gush. We perceive how the minds are dangling in threads of their own spinning, and that a hell is lurking underneath. I just thought that was incredibly poetic. Anyway, yeah, I think he was trying to make a point there.
But that's right. If we start messing around with our anchors, the things that kind of ground our reality with meaning, even playfully, yeah, it's a dangerous thing potentially. That's how I read that. Sorry, Judith, what were you going to say?
um, yeah, I don't know, but I don't think Marcus saw despair and horror, right? I think he he was at a point where he could look without those negative those negative lenses, if you like. So that's kind of the Stoic view. You don't, there's things about human life that are suboptimal, but it's up to you whether you want to call them despair and horror, or whether you want to call them suboptimal or unpreferred. And I'd say Marcus would say the latter. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Zapfe does seem to want to go from 0 to 100 without any gradations. In a sense, he's almost like, in a sense, he's almost like the old Calvinist preachers. Everything was terrible. Everything to do with human life is terrible. It's like it's
Yeah.
Calvinism, but with a Nietzschean and Darwinian twist to it.
Yeah, and it's the psychoanalytic thing, isn't it? It's the Freudian thing. It's like if Freud sat down with Marcus, that's what he would say, is that your philosophy is just part of your superego and it's a defense against your id, which is the deep, dark, aggressive impulses of your nature, which come out in all your bloodletting and warfare and so on and so forth. And that's what human reality is really all about. And the stories you tell yourself through your philosophy, for example, are just ways of hiding the truth from yourself, basically. But yeah, I mean, I don't agree either, but I've decided to be generous tonight, since everyone said I was so terrible about Schopenhauer and what a meanie I am. So there you go.
I, just if we leave it there for a second, I really
Yeah.
find something in here. Whenever we feel strong enough, we thus take pleasure in going together to bear an expired value and style. Material objects take on symbolic import here. I found that pretty salient, that we're often in a kind of revolutionary mode where we take any of these expired values and we almost cremate them. And when we like dance around the fire, like when society does that, whatever these old limitations are, we're so excited to get rid of them, like and accelerate its destruction and be kind of jubilant about it. But it
Yeah.
also means we transform what we're anchored to, and probably in the last few hundred years, fairly rapidly, because we're pretty revolutionary.
Hmm. Yeah, good point. Do you want to read the next bit? When a human being?
When a human being has eliminated those of his anchorings that are visible to himself, only the unconscious one staying put when he will call himself a liberated personality. A very popular mode of protection is distraction. One limits attention to the critical bounds by constantly enthralling it with impressions. This is typical even in childhood. Without distraction, the child is also insufferable to himself. Mum, what am I to do? A little English girl visiting her Norwegian aunt come inside from her room might say. What happens now? The nurses attain virtuosity. Look, a doggy. Watch, watch, there are paintings in the palace. The phenomenon is too familiar to require any further demonstration. Distraction is, for example, the high society tactic for living. It can be likened to a flying machine made of heavy material, but embodying a principle that keeps it airborne whenever applying. It must always be in motion. The air only carries it fleetingly. Pilot may grow drowsy and comfortable out of habit, but the crisis is acute as soon as the engine flunks.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned fads and fashion. You could imagine hunting and all sorts of things that people did in the past,
It,
kind of.
it's also the it's also the same as like New Orleans is an example of this. Whatever you think your city is, whatever you think the value of it is, it's sort of held up by some artificers. You know, New
Mm,
Orleans thought it was safe, thought it was a city. It's surrounded by dikes. Those dikes aren't that well managed. As soon as, like, often a city is almost built on a river of ice, like a frozen lake,
mm,
you know? And I think that's very similar to this airborne craft.
mm. Yeah, definitely. And Judith mentioned the bottom of page 8 already. Luckily, women in general are less cognition prone, so it saves you guys from that horrible despair of becoming a what was it that me and Sam had in common? Debauched bachelors or
I might just say on that sort of the Nietzsche influence too, because he went mad um, when a horse was being whipped. Like he identified with the horse and then descended into madness. And there's madness mentioned here, and also women, the degradation of women, but also like what we were mentioning before about Darwinism and the peacock and the antler. Like they are part of the beauty and the and attraction of reproduction, but it's also the destruction of that. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I've sort of pulled it all together, but I just find that interesting. Like there's some connection there for me, I think.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's lots of stuff going on. It's all yeah, I agree. And the next bit I thought was really interesting because I work in prison a little bit, and it says a considerable evil of imprisonment. Maybe I was taking it literally, but it definitely fits. Is the denial of most distractive options. And as terms for deliverance by other means are poor as well, the prisoner will tend to stay in the close vicinity of despair. The acts he then commits to deflect the final stage have a warrant in the principle of vitality itself. In such a moment, he is experiencing his soul within the universe and has no other motive than utter inendurability of that condition. Obviously, he's talking about everybody. We're all prisoners of the cosmos. But it is interesting looking at prisoners too, because they're denied, well, maybe he is talking about prisoners. Because they're denied distractive options. When you're in prison, there's nothing much there. They've got walkways, heaps of like open lawn and grass, but it's all fenced off. The prisoners aren't even allowed to play on the grass or walk on the grass. There are certain allotted areas, allocated areas they can go to within certain times, but most of the time they'll be locked down for 16 hours a day and things like this. So they when you talk to them, they'll say, "Ah, every day is the same day over and over and over," and they take up habits like walking to the end of their bed and back again, walking backwards, forwards, and that's how they get their exercise. Or they go out in the yard, which is a tiny little square bit of concrete, and they just walk around it over and over and over and over and over again in order to get a bit of exercise, but to break up the boredom of existence. And the trouble is, I was talking to a young guy the other day. He's only 27. He's spent about 10 years on the inside already of his life. And he says he's institutionalized, which means something like they can't cope with the stimulation of the outside world. Um, it's all too much. They don't like the boredom of being trapped. It's horrible. It's a torture, but they don't really know how to cope in the real world either. I guess my point is, when you think about it like this, here is an argument against imprisonment, at least the kind of prisons that deny people distraction. And I think um, prisoners will often say that they wish they had more access to education and things like that. But obviously, the government thinks that that's too expensive. So anyway, a bit of a side thing. I just think that's really interesting. Anyone have anything to say about any of these things?
Well, that goes on to the later point that sometimes the conscious person would prefer sublimation rather than repeated occurrence. They prefer a gradient that at least seems like it's growing.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Do you want to jump to that bit now? Um, well, he talks about life panic here. It's pretty rare. Um, is there anything in there that we need to say? Not really. When a human being takes his life in depression, this is a natural death. This is a pretty bizarre view. When a human being takes his life in depression, this is a natural death of spiritual causes. The modern barbarity of saving the suicidal is based on a hair-raising misapprehension of the nature of existence. Well, I don't think any of us agree with that here.
Well, I don't know, actually. I mean, I think to the extent that, for example, the ancient Stoics accepted that at a certain point or different certain points, there were, the desire to end one's life was an appropriate response. But that totally went out the window in the Christian and post-Christian centuries. I think he may have a point. For some people, uh, yeah, the ending of one's life um, is a response that you can kind of understand, whereas our culture today, and you'd know more about this than I do, Courtney, being in the biz, in the psych biz, but there doesn't seem to be any pathway that would recognize that for certain persons in certain situations, that's an appropriate response. But I think he's saying that, yeah, in his saying this is a natural death of spiritual causes, I think he's acknowledging that in some situations it may be an appropriate response.
But I think what he's saying, the bit I have a problem with, the modern barbarity of saving the suicidal is based on a hair-raising misapprehension of the nature of existence. He's really saying, isn't he, that we all should probably kill ourselves.
That's his
Because,
argument.
yeah, it'd be
That's
better
that
not to live at all, he's really saying.
that's where he's so like Schopenhauer. Like that's what I've read in Schopenhauer, the same sentiment. And they justify it, and that's their position.
He's really saying if we really understood what the nature of existence was, and we didn't have all the distractions in place to make it tolerable for a time, you'd be better off being dead by the sounds of it.
Yeah, that madness is true sanity. That a reaction to the genuine impermanence and intemperance and inability to solve anything really, genuinely. Um, the correct response to that, like the ultimate response to that, should be to give up or to bow out.
Mm.
Because he seems to believe that none of the specifics are, not that they're illusions, they're all just in the way. They're all just busy work. They're all just things to mill around our time.
Distractions.
Yeah.
And this is
He
the
doesn't
thing.
actually, but he doesn't actually address things like relationships. Remember in section 1, he had a man and a woman. Well, presumably the man and the woman were in some kind of relationship, but he doesn't anywhere kind of spell out what's involved with an actual relationship. So he's kind of sort of, yeah, rejecting whatever elements in normal human life that are represented by relationships.
But I
He,
think
he was
yeah, I was going to
he was
say,
ma-
he even said at the beginning, right, Jody, that stuff about everything becomes an echo of his own voice. So he becomes increasingly alienated the less he has access to these anchorings and distractions. So it means that relationships become meaningless distractions as well, I think.
I think
And he
it
had the
pays to look at their sorry, Sam. It pays to look at their personal lives. I'm starting to think there is value in it. Like he was married twice. He was a very avid mountain climber and was well known, as Judith knows as well. He was a mountain climber, and he climbed heaps and heaps of mountains and was quite famous for it. But he didn't have any children because he didn't believe in having children. He was what is it, anti-natal? What do you call it? Against having children. And so yeah, so he had no children. But yes, he did marry twice. So, and he was with the second wife till the end of his life, pretty much.
what an
I think
affirming
she might.
marriage that second relationship must have been. What an affirming,
Well,
life-affirming marriage that would be.
I think she predeceased him. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's in the Wikipedia. I think she predeceased him by a number of small number of years, but so he did have some relationship in his life. He did, um, which I can't see him. Yeah, he has not brought that into it at all, has he, Judith? Not at all.
No, that's exactly right, Jody. And I think you're right. I think, of course, you have to look at biography as a framing of somebody's philosophy. But yeah, in this case, it's as if he hadn't any relationships, right? He doesn't seem to acknowledge that as a factor as an important factor in life. But
I, I,
just to sort of take things sort of slightly broader for a moment, so he was writing this in the 30s. Um, my parents in the 1940s were kind of a part of a intellectual anarchist movement. And I think it was part of the kind of the mid-century thing, or between the wars, mid-century, that there was a rejection of all conventional values and all these conventional anchorings, as he puts it, insightfully. Uh, and and then you have the question, well, what's left? What's left in order to build lives and relationships? And to be honest, I don't think Zapfe had many answers there. Um, and insofar as the milieu of my parents, they really didn't. That milieu didn't really have many options either. And from my point of view, it's just fortunate that they found each other and formed a relationship. But yeah, I mean, I think it was essentially a nihilist project in the first half of the 20th century for many intellectuals.
But I think he's also saying he's happy to play the game because he says later, I'm writing this essay. It's an act of sublimation. It's one of the defenses against meaninglessness. And I'm going to get printed in a journal. He says that. He knows it. He's making an admission. I know that what I'm doing is a waste of time, but you got to live. But this is the bit that you were talking about, Sam, where he says, and this is grim as well. Everything has a kind of cynical turn. He says, if you think about like what is it? A bell curve. Uh, he says, whenever a goal is reached, the yearning moves on. Hence, its object is not the goal, but the very attainment of it. The gradient, not the absolute height of the curve representing one's life. So people, he says, there's no such thing as progressive optimism. People don't become more and more optimistic because the gradient kind of levels out. So there's less enjoyment as you get older, the more goals you get. Sounds pretty miserable. Um, And then he talks about the fourth remedy. We're skipping ahead a little bit here against panic, and this is that bit we just mentioned, sublimation, which again is classic in psychoanalytic tradition. If you remember, Freud says that um, you're doomed if you do, and you're doomed if you don't. It's the problem of civilization that we're these kind of wild animals who've tamed this kind of um, you know, aggressive sexual libido. And one way of doing of restraining ourselves in a moderately healthy way, if that could be kind of said, is through sublimation, where we take those aggressive sexual drives and we turn them into um, artistic, creative pursuits, like what we call culture and art and the intellectual disciplines and things like that, presumably the arts. Um, and that's what he says about his writing here, right? He says, what does he say? Through stylistic or artistic gifts, can the very pain of living at times be converted into valuable experiences? Positive
it,
impulses engage the evil and put it to their own ends, fastening onto its pictorial, dramatic, heroic, lyric, or even comic aspects. Sorry, Sam?
th- th- this basically reminds me of what Catherine has been saying. It's creative transformation of what you do of looking at in the abyss. It's what comedians do all the time as well. It's to stare at it and laugh, or to stare at it and kind of be in on the joke, to be okay, to accept the joke, to
Yeah,
accept the limitations.
yeah, absolutely. And isn't there a saying that I don't know it's true, but there's this anecdotal thing that a lot of comedians are really depressive people, and that's kind of that point about playing around with these things. You might rip a hole in the bottom of the bag and see the abyss through, yeah, through that. I like this image. The mountaineer does not enjoy his view of the abyss while choking with vertigo. Only when his feeling is more or less overcome does he enjoy it, anchored. So to write a
Yeah, even
tragedy,
that's so negative, right? If you've
yeah,
been at the top of a climb and you're looking out, you've got the view from above, it's wonderful. You just see the beauty of everything and survey it, and it's just such a privilege.
Mm.
Obviously, this is the difference between my worldview and our friend here.
Yeah, definitely. But he says, what do you think about this? To write a tragedy, one must to some extent free oneself from, betray the very feeling of tragedy, and regard it from an outer, e.g., aesthetic point of view. I think that's Nietzschean too, right? Nietzsche thought that the Greeks invented tragedy, and in some sense, they were able to objectify it or put it out there on the stage and kind of see it as an external phenomenon or something like that. So to turn it into an aesthetic thing, a thing that can be enjoyed for its own sake without having to indulge too directly with it, to put it
To
out
see the
there.
shape of it from the outside rather than live inside of it and be averse to
Mm.
its ramifications. So they as a way of approaching it.
Yeah. And he gets a bit cynical again. Here is, by the way, an opportunity for the wildest round dancing through ever higher ironic levels into a most embarrassing circulus vitiosus. Here one can, and apparently I looked it up, that means a vicious circle. I'm sure Jews knew that. Here one can chase one's ego across numerous habitats, enjoying the capacity of the various layers of consciousness to dispel one another. And this is where he says the present essay is a typical attempt at sublimation. The author does not suffer. He is filling pages and is going to be published in a journal. But the martyrdom of lonely ladies also shows a kind of sublimation. They gain in significance thereby. There you go. Nevertheless, sublimation appears to be the rarest of the protective means mentioned here. Now, look, this next part is where I think he proposes a kind of solution, and it's one that I thought was endearing. Um,
Can I just quickly say something about
yes,
appropriateness? I liked what we were saying before about appropriateness of, people who kind of correctly assent to anchorings, that distractions might be a little bit vapid, or at this, real sublimation, real creative transformation. But I think there's often an issue where people think they're either so creative that they can, or so special that they could manage this level of sort of self-introspection like incredibly well, if that makes sense. That we feel like we're so creative or we're so individual that we could manage to remake absolutely all of ourselves. Where
mm,
it might be a large amount of the population might be happier just taking on offloading some things to some levels of cultural anchorings.
yeah.
Like, like we
So
we probably does that make sense?
you're referring,
I, I,
are you talking about the individual who can make his own set of values for himself?
yes, there are sort of, and I think there are different like stratas. Like there are different. It's pretty special to find a very rare, very high quality artist.
Yeah. So this is the Ubermensch, right?
Yes, but it's not that different to the depressive artist either,
Yeah.
to Van Gogh. But we think we're so. I think we. I think too many people think they could be this capable that
Oh,
they
yeah.
try and do this amount of work. Where that's probably not true for a large population. 90%, a good amount of a population might manage better with just taking on some levels of anchorings, even if they like pick them, like you did, Courtney. Like I should.
Yeah. This seems a bit more egalitarian than Nietzsche's view, right? Because Nietzsche has this idea of the Übermensch, which is a particular creative individual, and that culture really should serve his needs, and that he, because of his genius and his intellect, comes first among his peers and probably should be treated as some sort of demigod. And you know. I don't really see that in this one. This one seems to be we're all damned and it's all the same.
It feels like he's just the sublimator is just like a precarious, creative, damned person. He just sits at the high ropes of the tightrope at the top of the circus.
Yeah, he's just
Sorry.
found a healthy way to live. well, not healthy. He's found a fairly stable way to stave off existential angst. There you go. Is it positive for primitive natures to renounce these cramps and cavorts and live in harmony with themselves in the serene bliss of labor and love? And as you said earlier on, Judith, he says, nah, not really. Um, not without not being human, basically. But this is where I think this is a solution. What do you guys think? The strongest claim to be made about the so-called peoples of nature is that they are somewhat closer to the wonderful biological ideal than we unnatural people. Okay, put that aside for a second. And when even we have so far been able to save a majority through every storm, we have been assisted by the sides of our nature that are just modestly or moderately developed. Okay, so we're helped by the sides of our nature that aren't the intellect, obviously, I guess, because that's not moderately developed. This positive basis, as protection alone cannot create life, only hinder its faltering. So doesn't that mean, it doesn't save us, but it prevents us from falling into this negative state. So this positive basis must be sought in the naturally adapted deployment of the energy in the body and the biologically helpful parts of the soul, subject to such hardships as are precisely due to sensory limitations, bodily frailty, and the need to do work for life and love. So there's something in the body, in the organism, which one can turn to, maybe not in the intellect, but something in that which it has a positive basis. That's what he's
Well, isn't
talking
it?
about.
But isn't he just saying there that it's kind of a lowest common denominator, right? He says essentially it's to do with sex. Basically, that the species will continue operating because of sex. Isn't
Where's
that
that?
literally just what he's saying?
Where's that?
Well, that's what. Sorry, just go up a bit with the text. Um, we have been assisted by the sides of our nature that is modestly or moderately developed. This positive basis, as protection alone can, blah, 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 must be sought in the naturally adapted deployment of the energy in the body and the biologically helpful parts of the soul. To me, that just means all that he's saying there is that it's the reproductive
Oh,
drive of the
really?
species. Yeah,
Oh, I
subject.
don't
Yeah,
see
that's
that. But
yeah, that's
maybe
all. That's all he's basically invoking this lowest common denominator
I would
because
say
earlier he's questioned why humanity just didn't kill itself and die out completely, and the answer must be obviously that the biological drive to reproduce is stronger than that. That's all he's invoking there, I think.
Oh, really? Wow, I read this in a totally different way. But that's interesting. I mean, you could very well be right. Because I think I give it a way more positive reading than he would intend. I see it as that there's something about being an embodied being, having a body, which can speak to us about the health of nature, the kind of thing that we are. But I think you're right. I think I'm reading into it a much more optimistic message. Um, and again, yeah, okay, so
I
yeah,
agree with Judith. I agree with Judith's reading there.
there you go.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to take my very optimistic reading because I prefer it. And just in this finite land of bliss within the fronts, do the progressing civilization, technology, and standardization have such a debasing influence? For as an ever-growing fraction of the cognitive faculties retire from the game against the environment, there is a rising spiritual unemployment. The value of a technical advance to the whole undertaking of life must be judged by its contribution to the human opportunity for spiritual occupation. Though boundaries are blurry, perhaps the first tools for cutting might be mentioned as a case of a positive invention. I'm just wondering how, anyway, doesn't matter. Other technical inventions enrich only the life of the inventor himself. They represent a gross and ruthless theft from humankind's common reserve of experiences and should invoke the harshest punishment if made public against the veto of censorship. He's a bit of a Luddite here, isn't he? One such crime among numerous others is the use of flying machines to explore uncharted land. In a single vandalistic glob, one thus destroys lush opportunities for experience that could benefit many if each, by effort, obtained his fair share. Isn't he saying that the problem with flying machines is it stops you from walking there and exploring? And that's why I think his biological thing is more than sex. He's talking about the using of one's body.
Oh, maybe. But also, interestingly, as this has just occurred to me, in the first sort of 30 years of the 20th century, Norway was very proactive in its explorers, right? So they Roald Amundsen and other Nansen and other great Norwegian explorers were kind of, penetrating to the vast wildernesses of the globe. And I think he's probably gesturing to that, right? As a Norwegian, this was a great national project, and he's just
He
basically
knew
saying,
him.
yeah, no,
He
sorry.
knew Munson. He knew Munson.
Oh, you
He knew
did
him.
too. That's right. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So he's
yeah.
he's kind of putting a bit of a shade on these explorers who were. It was a hugely important national project for the Norwegians, this exploration of the poles. So yeah, it's interesting how he how he's kind of dissing it here.
But see,
I,
this
I don't
to
I don't think he's
include
dissing
this.
it. I think he's dissing the almost virtualization of it. By using the flying machine, you're robbing the creative, the embodied experience. I
Hmm.
think we do the
That's
same.
it.
I think the modern version would be that we have Google Maps or like Street View. Like rather than being in the world or exploring the world, we kind of throw a perspective into the world ahead of us. I feel like we pretend that we could experience all of it without leaving our home,
I
but
agree,
we
Sam.
don't live it with it.
And I think that's why it's more than just sex, what he's talking about. I think he's really talking about the embodied experience and that there's something
Well, I think
about
it's more
that
about the
that's
drive of
positive.
life. Judith was more, I think, possibly, I don't know, Judith, you can tell me if I'm wrong, that whole drive of life, libido, the whole the whole vital drive of life and reproduction and,
Sure, that's
um,
got to be part of it. But like
yeah.
what Sam's talking about, look at what mobile phones have done to relationships. People used
Oh
to sit
yeah, he's saying,
and talk to each
but he was
other.
a mountain climber and a Munson went overland. So he's saying, these airplanes, hey, they take all the fun out of it,
Yeah,
where's the
exactly.
adventure? You
And
know.
I'm
Yeah.
agreeing with that. I'm saying it also takes the fun out of sitting with a person when you're trying to have dinner with them, when they're looking at their mobile phone and they're talking to someone or texting someone who's 10,000 miles away when you're sitting right in front of them. It's that experience. It's that embodied. Anyway, that's what I reckon. I'm sticking to my guns here. It's like, we'll keep going. So the current phase of life's chronic fever is particularly tainted by all this stuff that we're arguing about. The absence of naturally biologically based spiritual activity shows up. For example, in the pervasive recourse to distraction, entertainment, sport, radio, the rhythm of the times. Terms for anchoring are not as favorable. All the inherited collective systems of anchorings are punctured by criticism and anxiety, disgust, confusion, despair leak in through the rifts. Corpses in the cargo. Communism and psychoanalysis, however incommensurable otherwise, both attempt, as communism has also spiritual reflection, by novel means to vary the old escape anew, applying retrospectively violence and guile to make humans biologically fit by ensnaring their critical surplus of cognition. So he's very cynical even about them, right? The idea is in either case, is uncannily logical, but again, it cannot yield a final solution. The deliberate degeneration to a more viable nadir may certainly save the species in the short run. It will, by its nature, be unable to find peace in such resignation or indeed find any peace at all. So we can't go from religion and we can't turn to communism and even psychoanalysis can't solve our problems. Um, yeah, there's no final solution. And there's only one little bit left. Look at us go. We got 15 minutes left. There's There's one page left. Who wants to read the last page, page 5, chapter 5? Come on, quick.
I can do that. If we continue these considerations to the bitter end, then the conclusion is not in doubt. As long as humankind recklessly proceeds in the fateful delusion of being biologically fated for triumph, nothing essential will change. As its numbers mount and the spiritual atmosphere thickens, the techniques of protection must assume an increasingly brutal character. What's that mean?
I
As
don't
long as
really follow his reasoning here, but
yeah,
Well,
is
I
that
think he's got, I mean, again, I think he's got a lot of insight here. This is 1933, right? He's sensing or intuiting that things are coming to a crisis, and that he can see communism. He may or may not have seen Nazism on the horizon as well, but essentially totalitarian ideologies are what's in the wings. He's kind
yeah,
of intuiting that, I think.
yes,
And
yeah.
and as we're even more alienated, as we're even more conscious and not embodied, our solutions become more brutalizing
Mm.
to
Yeah, I
being
keep
human.
forgetting it's 100 years ago he wrote this nearly, isn't it?
yeah.
Wow.
Now it makes a lot of sense because
Mm.
communism obviously was trying to strip out the old traditions and replace them with new things. And yeah, you're right, that is incredibly brutal. And the results were incredibly brutal. Revolution, right? And also the techniques of psychoanalysis are quite brutal. Look at the philosophy. It's pretty sad. Anyway,
Last
keep
bit.
going.
And humans will persist in dreaming of salvation and affirmation and a new Messiah. There's the title. Yet when many saviours have been nailed to trees and stoned on the city squares, then the last Messiah shall come. Then will appear the man who, as the first of all, has dared strip his soul naked and submit it alive to the utmost thought of the lineage, the very idea of doom. A man who has fathomed life and its cosmic ground, and whose pain is the earth's collective pain. With that furious with what furious screams shall not mobs of all nations cry out for his thousandfold death, when like a cloth his voice encloses the globe, and the strange message has resounded for the first and last time. The life of the worlds is a roaring river, but earth's is a pond and a backwater. The sign of doom is written on your brows. How long will ye kick against the pinpricks? But there is one conquest and one crown, one redemption and one solution. Know yourselves, be infertile, and let the earth be silent after ye. And when he has spoken, they will pour themselves over him, led by the pacifier makers and the midwives, and bury him in their fingernails. He is the last Messiah, as son from father. He stems from the archer by the waterhole. The archer by the waterhole.
So it's kind of a closed circle, it's kind of biblical theme, kind of
Yeah,
started,
like
we
comedians do
started with it.
when they bring their when they
Yeah.
And
bring their
I
routine
I
back to
realize
the
it's appropriate that it's an archer as well, because an archer aims and then shoots off something at a direction. But he's saying the cyclical nature of the problem is that there's nothing, the aiming isn't worth enough. The aiming doesn't solve anything. It's just aiming to aim to aim to aim to aim to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. That this final solution, communism as like an ideal form of being human, can be nailed and crucified and played out. But it would be replaced and then replaced and then replaced by, he's saying, this kind of ideal. This would be what people would select if they saw its end.
Mm. Well,
I think, well, but also, I mean, he says, be infertile and let the earth be
mm,
silent after ye. That's an anti-natalist
yeah.
position. So in a sense, he's even more brutal than communism. I mean, and Nazism. I mean, that he basically wants his generation to be the last in the world. Now, I mean, there's certain extreme environmentalists who would
Mm.
endorse that position now, but it's a minority position. I think we can confidently say. So yeah, it's and when he's writing is when the sort of the I don't know, the infrastructure of environmentalism basically didn't exist. So his anti-natalism is from a pre-environmentalist perspective. It's just from a human suffering kind
Yeah.
of point of
Yeah.
view.
He
It's
was
a
an
very
early
extreme position.
he was an early environmentalist because he campaigned very strongly for for national parks and for nature reserves to so that and it said in Wikipedia not so much for preservation but to keep it from being submitted to human culture,
Yeah.
keeping
Yeah, that's
nature.
right. It's not having national parks for our grandchildren's benefit. No, no, we don't have any grandchildren. It's a very extreme position. So yeah,
It is
yeah.
an extreme position, but it's hard to say it's a brutal position because he doesn't advocate for killing anyone. He advocates for the end of suffering. That's what he's talking about, as
Mm.
he
And even
understands
when he
it.
claims he's a nihilist, even when he says he's a nihilist, he says, and not so it's not a moral position. Like it's not a moral position. It's a
Mm.
rational position, if you like, you know.
Yeah, it's almost the
Mm.
gravity of nature, of being in the world, because that the archer becomes this pacifist that lays himself down to die, and just gets reabsorbed into nothing. That is, the archer is the same as that it's the conscious.
Mm.
The conscious that chooses its direction, shouldn't be doing that. It should just become a part of nature again.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. We've got a few minutes left. Let's offer our closing observations. I thought this would be a really interesting one and that we'd have completely varying views about it. And I feel satisfied with that assessment. I personally found it very stimulating. I like reading Nietzsche, and I think this guy writes in a kind of similar way, like you said, Judith, to Thus Spake Zarathustra. I enjoy that sort of writing. I actually get bored with very dull, kind of abstract philosophy. I do like something with a bit of panache to it. So for me, it was fun. And yeah, there's things in there that I just think are wonderfully insightful and highly observant about human psychology, which I think gives it points as well. I don't agree with all the pessimism in that, but there's some really good observations in here that could be turned in a more positive direction, just as equally as in a negative direction. So I think it's actually really useful for someone who wanted to cherry pick it and play around with some of the themes. That's my view. Anyone else?
I was just going to say in that last little bit where it says, and when he has spoken, they will pour themselves over him, led by the pacifier makers and the midwives, and bury him in their fingernails. So he's basically saying at the very end of this, he knows that the Messiah will fail because the urgency and the push and the vitalism of life itself, not allow will not allow that uh, extinction of humans in the way that he's proposing.
Good point. So what's your final view on it, Jody?
Oh, look, very much like you said about comparing it to Schopenhauer, and yeah, a little bit grim for my liking. Yeah, I have enough trouble trying to stay positive.
And who else? Lorraine, Judith, Catherine, Sam, what did you reckon?
Well, I enjoyed it. I thought it was very interesting. And I thought it was a really good length as well. So that you could, go page by page. And I found that really interesting, listening to everybody's ideas about it. So yes, I thought it was great. The problem is I find that he makes some really pertinent points that are difficult to argue against. I'm not suggesting that we kill ourselves and don't have children necessarily, But you can see where he's coming from. So yes, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good choice.
Courtney, how did you come across it? Because I was just interested about that.
I usually just Google great philosophical essays that are about 10, 20 pages long, and I just troll Reddit and stuff trying to find what we're going to do next. But you guys need to tell me if you want to read something in particular, tell me. But I think you mentioned one last time, Judith, but yeah, keep me.
Yeah, well, I can't remember, but you did mention you'd be interested in some of the readings that I've done with the College of Stoic Philosophers,
Oh,
and
yeah.
there's two. Well, there's two, but unfortunately they're kind of book length. So yeah, there's one called Mind and Cosmos by Thomas Nagel. That's a really good, but it's book length, but it's not a very long book. That's it. And Philip Goff, and I can't remember the name of his book. But yeah, I mean, if people are up for reading a slightly longer text, that might be good.
Was
Yeah.
Nagel the one that said, what's it like to be a bat, or is it a different
Yeah,
one?
that's him. That's exactly
Yeah.
right. Yeah, that made his name in the 70s, and then in 2012 he's written this book which kind of kind of ruined his name because everyone said, oh, it's a great mind in its dotage. But yeah, I think it's a really good book.
Yeah, that could be great. Obviously, like Lorraine said, this one was one of those lovely ones that was really short and easy to handle. But maybe we could split the book in 2 or 3 pieces or something. See how we go. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Catherine, Sam?
I think it uses very pointed illustrative language that is collected from a lot of sources. It's painted some Christian pictures, like it's kind of multi-dimensional. So you can see quite what it's pointing towards. And then I think it's very clear where you can tell by tracking that line, you can see where you disagree. I think that was a really fun experience, especially getting to do that again with everyone.
And I really loved it. I loved its power and its directness. I love the metaphors. Um, I don't mind a bit of a depressing read, so I'm on board with that. And I don't mind a bit of antenatal stuff either, because I sort of understand that as someone that's never wanted kids. And the cycle of like repetition. And at the end, what was the end part about the repetition? The arrow being straight, like not having children is almost like breaking the cycle. Instead of going around, you're being finite, not infinite. I really like the metaphors about nakedness and homelessness. And there was a really beautiful quote that I'll share from a philosophy seminar I listened to retrospectively, which kind of opposes this whole thing, but I think kind of fits with it because it started with the homeless being naked and homeless in the cosmos. And this quote is a counter to that. It's a Lukács quote, and its philosophy is really homesickness. It is the urge to be at home everywhere. And I think that's kind of the ultimate goal, isn't it? You don't want to be homeless. You want to be in your home, in your body, in the world with others. And obviously that's what I aspire to. Haven't got there yet. But yeah, being at home in the world. Not being homeless would be my goal.
That's wonderful, Catherine.
That's
Well said.
lovely. That's lovely.
And I'm mindful too that we haven't had Judith's view on the text. Are you keeping that up your sleeve, are you, Judith?
No, I enjoyed it. Obviously it's a worldview that I don't agree with, but I thought it was very well expressed and insightful in many particulars. So yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Well, it was so good to see you all again, and I'm glad we all had a good time. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll hit the end button. But I look forward to chatting to you all again in a couple of weeks. So I'm not sure what we'll read, but maybe it'll be maybe something that you recommend, Judith. Maybe we can start that book. We'll have a chat about it online, I'm sure. Anyway, stay well, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Catch you later. Enjoy your weekend. Bye.